like if like our education system in the United States is really, I guess, in quite a state of exclusion. So something that I had found recently, so this applies to medical school, right? But like this is the first time that I heard that in the United States, when you apply for, I believe it was like rotation positions, you have to like the average number that is considered good is 100 to like 200 different rotation. And like there was, for example, someone who couldn't really afford, the application fees for each one. He only applied to 40 or 50 and essentially got nowhere. And it was only until later on that they were like, oh, 100 and 200 is what you should be aiming for. And the stories of medical students take out entirely separate student loans just for applications itself. Like, I think it's wonderful that we have a lot of like success stories of like, for example, Black women physicians, physicians that are first, in their family, first gen to, get into medical school or PhD programs. But it really, I guess, is sort of eye-opening to think about, people who didn't make it and for the reasons why that, policymakers should be looking into.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think across academia, there's a huge diversity problem at the faculty level. But those success stories that you mentioned, I mean, I agree with you. They're all great, but those individual success stories don't solve the systemic problems that prevent so many other success stories from happening. We have to talk about the actual processes by which these decisions are made, who makes them, who benefits, how are we incentivizing people? I think, I don't want to harp on the problems of academia, but they are fascinating and important, and who's going to fix them if not us? So I think it's important to talk about them. I don't want to give the impression that I'm entirely negative about academia, but I am aware of many of the issues. And I think that this opacity in these processes works to the benefit of the status quo. And an example of this is kind of Title IX and sexual harassment and gender harassment and sexual discrimination cases. I'm not talking about any individual institution, but kind of nationally, the pattern is that when people are brave enough to make to make reports and complaints about these incidents, which are not rare, they tend to vanish. They go away. And in some ways, I feel like our reporting system is designed to make that happen. Or it certainly, well, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I'll say this. If you were going to design a reporting system with the intention of making these complaints vanish, never to be seen again, you really couldn't do much better than the system that we have right now. I think that lack of transparency, you have to just think about who benefits from that. And advocating to change those kinds of things is very, very challenging because the responsibility tends to be distributed and very hard to find. I'm very confused about things like, just, I guess, to keep talking about the Title IX system, I'm very confused about how it works because, we hear from our institutions that it's federal Title IX policy on reporting that is why, those federal guidelines are the reason why the system works the way that it does, and it needs to be fixed at the federal level. But I'm actually not so sure about that. I've been finding examples, and this is one of the Twitter conversations that's been happening recently. There are universities that have very different Title IX policies that seem like they could be much more to the benefit of the victims than the kind of standard ones that most universities have, which seem to be there to protect the universities. So, it's hard to even find out who could change the system and exactly how that could happen. And that can be very frustrating and demoralizing, even leaving aside the stress and difficulties involved in actually being involved in a Title IX case. Just contemplating the system itself alone is daunting. But I think there's more and more willingness to make noise about those sorts of things, or at least ask questions about them. And I have to say, I see, because I'm involved in admissions, I see new PhD students coming in every year, and I feel like every year the class of students that comes in is more willing to engage, more willing to self-advocate, and more willing to ask those really tough questions. They're much less interested in impressing me, and they're much more interested in finding out from me what it's really like to be a graduate student in my program, which is great, because that's what we want them to be doing. That was a very wide-ranging and perhaps not to the point answer to your question.
So I have a question that I've sort of been thinking about a while. So I guess for people who don't know, I met Scott through Twitter. So that was like the magic of social media and academic Twitter. And I think I first heard about him when we were sort of seeing this shift, more conversations towards inclusion and equity. And it was, I forgot for which particular panel or conference it was, but it was essentially a manel, so panel of white men. And Scott had tweeted about, he noticed that, this is not really representative of, the talent and the sciences that we have outside of that particular group. And one thing that really struck me was that, he was seeking accountability, he was seeking something actionable. So, at that instant, he sort of like sought out another woman scientist in the field and sort of let her, replace him in the panel. And I was thinking about like, at that moment. So I think a lot of people know that they hold like some degree of power, but sort of recognizing like how do you change that into something that can help advocate for, for women, for other minoritized groups in the sciences and, the general field. I guess like sort of what was like the thought process at that time? Like how did you, make that
Yeah.
decision? Like I'm stepping down, I'm amplifying someone else.
Well, I mean, Twitter had a big impact on my thinking in this area. I mostly got involved to kind of follow kind of trainees and listen to trainees and get different perspectives, especially from historically excluded trainees, to try to get a better sense of how I should be doing my job. And it had a massive impact on my thinking about everything having to do with grad school, I have to say. I know that Twitter isn't real life, but there's a lot of real life that happens on Twitter that you can't see anywhere else. Because we're not all a member of all of these communities, right? So you just get a broader perspective, and this concept of passing the mic is something that I think I more or less learned about it on Twitter. That it's one thing to talk about equity, it's another thing to stop talking and give somebody else a chance to talk, who is someone who gets fewer opportunities. So it turns out, basically I learned that from Twitter, and it's quite easy to do when you get an opportunity, and you're excited about it, and you feel like you're probably in a group that is overrepresented for that opportunity. You politely decline and suggest that a couple of names of people who are in less privileged groups that could do the job, probably in most cases better than you. So it turns out it feels great to do that. I felt weird talking about that on Twitter, but I felt like, because I don't want to just like be a prominent male feminist or something, but it's that's not very helpful. But I thought it might be helpful to kind of model for other people like me, like how easy and in fact gratifying it is to do that. Now there is another side of it, which is like, if you're doing, I almost never say the word, so I feel weird about saying it, but if you do allyship properly, then you are going to be losing things. You're going to be losing opportunities. You're going to be saying no to things that would maybe be good for your career. Um, uh, so, and somebody said that to me once, and it really impacted me, that it's that if I'm doing quote unquote allyship and it's only helping me, then I'm probably not really doing allyship. So that's just a very simple and easy thing that you can do on an axis where you are more privileged to pass the mic to somebody else. It still feels weird talking about it, but you know.
As a matter of fact, this is something. Oh, sorry. No, please.
I'd rather hear what you have to say about it.
No, I was actually, I would like to ask you, how do you get allies? So one of the biggest, I wouldn't say problem, but like I think like room to improve, an area where there's room to improve here at CCNY Women in Science is the fact that we cannot get men to participate. And you know, I've been trying to have all my friends participating, and unfortunately they moved on and they graduated, and I have no longer close friends that I can put pressure on to attend. So, and that's how it worked before. And I just personally asked them to join. And now, yeah, I never, in the last, I don't know, like 5 years since I'm here at the organization, we are not able to engage a community of men to participate, or people that are, that are not only women or LGBTQ participating. And I don't know how to do that as an organization. What would be your advice or some, I don't know, ideas?
That is a tough one, because I mean, just culturally, we have such low expectations for white men. They're so low. And I mean, to the point that me doing something like suggesting a Black woman for a panel instead of me is like considered something that is noteworthy, you know, or you know, at least slightly noteworthy, right? That's kind of ridiculous. I think, you know, some of that can happen in like faculty meetings. I mean, I think it's very difficult for trainees to change the culture at the level above them in the academic chain. That's very, very difficult to do. I've seen, I mean, if we talk about gender, I've seen women kind of do some of this work at the faculty meeting level where I feel like, you know, in cases where we're talking about like faculty hiring or something, and I said something about, I felt like we were treating this woman differently than we were treating that man. And like some women in the department, like made sure to like talk to me about that afterwards and like praise me, give me cookies, you know, and tell me that was good that you said that. We need more men. We need more men to say that. Now they shouldn't have to do that, right? They shouldn't have to be hunting down men and trying to get them to behave properly. But it can happen to some extent at that level. And you know, one step further from that would be for them to say, well, it's good that you're saying stuff like this, but really you should be encouraging the other men, right? Because men tend to listen to other men more, which is the whole problem. But how can we use that to our advantage, right? Cultivating, picking off men from the herd and then turning them, into allies or whatever. But that's a very small scale individual process. But changing the temperature of the conversation in one department's faculty meeting over time can end up having a big impact, I think.
Absolutely.
At the institutional level, I have no idea how you do that.
I guess like like you said, like there's so many levels. Even like how to engage our peers, right, to participate. And most of the time they say, oh, this is a woman science, a space for women, but it's not true. We are advertised as everyone is welcome, and we welcome indeed everyone. So
Yeah.
It's a tough problem.
I think people have to be willing in meetings like that to say the uncomfortable thing. Like, for example, just to take a hypothetical example, we keep having these faculty hiring sessions and these rounds of faculty hiring, and we all talk about how we're going to be equitable and inclusive when we do it. We've all taken the unconscious bias training, and yet it turns out our short list has one woman and one Latino person on it, and it went to the white guy, and we all feel great because we had one woman and one Latino person on the short list, but what matters is the outcome. Who did you hire, right? Not how good you felt about your own process, but who did you hire? And if we keep hiring the white person over and over again, and we're feeling good about it. I feel like that's where a lot of departments are right now, where the outcomes are still the same, but we feel so much better about how well trained we are in unconscious bias. That's not progress. So, that's an example of where you can look at where power flows, right? So it's in many cases, it's the dean who determines which departments can hire and which departments can't hire in any given, or how many slots they're going to get. Are they looking at the statistics on, for the last 4 faculty hires for this department, right? How many of them were white? How many of them were men? How many of them were white men? And is that going to impact how many slots they get in the future? That's where that's where all the leverage is. And we know from when the NIH, for example, changes its policies and requires, a diversity analysis for a training grant. Training grants will do whatever is necessary to keep that funding flowing, right? And it actually pays off. If you look at the programs in my umbrella, it's the NIH funded programs that have the best diversity and inclusion numbers, because they have to, they're financially incentivized to. The other ones aren't. So that can work at the faculty, at the department level as well for faculty hiring. The question is, who is going to actually use that lever? Because none of us are making those decisions. How can we put pressure upwards?
I do have a follow-up question, but I don't want to be the only one talking. So guys, if you want to ask a question, please do it. Otherwise, if I detect like 5 seconds of silence, I jump in. So, it's because there's so many things to talk about. There's so many branches of our conversation, this one and the previous one we had before. So,
right.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, well, I don't have a question, but just a comment on top of what you said, because it's interesting that in all of our faculty meetings, because I'm a student representative for my program, so I get to go to the monthly meetings. And every time admission season comes around, they're like, oh, how are we going to get more diverse students to apply? And I always say the fee to apply, as you mentioned earlier, like it's like $75 here, which it's kind of a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
The GRE, and then also if we look at our faculty, it's not it's not as diverse. A lot of higher education has a lot of just white men, white women, like
mm-hmm.
Latino here or there. And so I always say, like, well, I'm Palestinian, and I don't think I've ever seen a Palestinian female neuroscientist in an academic program. And so I always bring this up and I say, we have to make these changes if we want more diverse students coming in. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, terrific point. Yeah. Because it's not just about who you admit, who you bring through the door. What experience are they having after they join the program, after they're admitted? And different students have very, very different experiences in the same place or even in the same lab. And in a way, fixing graduate admissions is kind of the easy part. And in fact, we've been doing much better. If you look at the numbers, we've been doing much, much better over the past 20 years at recruiting a diverse and admitting a diverse class of students. There's still a long way to go, but the improvement has been remarkable, because we were starting from such a bad place, and that has not trickled up to the faculty level basically at all. So people who know more than I talk about the pipeline problem as a really bad analogy, because we can pour as many people as we want into that pipeline, but if the pipeline itself is selecting against historically excluded people, then it doesn't do anybody any good, and it causes, and it, at the individual level, it wastes years of people's lives for the sake of us saying we're good at DEI. So the experience has to be equitable after recruitment, and the paths to not only barriers to higher levels of academic rank, but we have to actually make those levels of academic rank a place where people of diverse backgrounds would even want to be. Because in addition to excluding people who want to become academics, lab heads, there are also a lot of people who are like, this is not for me, I'm done. And after they get their PhD in many cases, and go out into the world and never look back, because this does not look like a safe place for them. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, for sure. And this is something that I've been thinking about, because I'm hopefully graduating at the end of this academic year or so. And so I'm looking into postdoc positions, thinking, like, do I want to go into academia? Like, I went to grad school because I knew, like, I wanted to run a lab, teach, be in academia and everything. But after experiencing academia for 5 years, I'm like, I'm not, like, is it worth it? Like, is the little compensation you get worth everything that you have to deal with?
Exactly. And of course, the goal isn't to retain everybody in academia, right? We're training people to go out and do all kinds of things, and that's great. But if people wanted to stay in academia, I mean, we don't want to be turning people off, because academia is actually important. Whether you like it or not, this is where people get their training. So we really have to do this well. And it takes a diverse group of people to do this well.
Yeah, so I actually had another question as well. And I definitely agree that, diversifying sort of like diversifying like the missions is not like the solution to, fixing systemic problems forever. Like there's definitely, like, as we've seen in the past year or so, a lot of like drop off in students because, hey, they're here in the university and now they're here in the program, but, the environment is so terrible that, why would they want to stay? And, that's when you see the that line go down. I guess my question too was actually something that you had mentioned previously during the colloquium, when you were talking about Grexit or the GRE exit, the whole GRE debate of like keep or dismantle. You mentioned that you had this sort of town hall where, faculty and students from both sides, like, pro and against the GRE, sort of read the papers, read the literature, had a debate in a town hall. And I think it was so powerful that people at the, the undergrad, at the student level, who are going through the program, getting the training, are involved in that process as well. And I think the difficulty in getting student involvement, whether it's at the undergrad or the master or PhD student level, is that a lot of students are very limited on time. And, a lot of times, like, money, resources have to put in to make sure that students are able to, do their work, do their schoolwork, in addition to taking part in these sort of extra things that are essentially the systemic change that, the institution is trying to see, right? So I guess my question is, like, was there anything particular that you did to sort of ease the burdens of the students who are taking part in these town halls and like similar conversations?
Well, the burdens and the pressures on the students involved in that debate are significant because they're basically going into the arena and debating with faculty members. And the power dynamics there are very scary. And, I mean, I didn't really do, I mean, beyond soliciting anonymous comments, that was really the only accommodation that I made for that, to be honest with you. The rest of it was just, those students who felt that they could go to that town hall and ask a tough question were the ones who did it. And there were probably many others who had strong opinions, but didn't feel safe doing that, and they didn't do it. So, I tried to kind of amplify those student voices because I felt like they were more important than the faculty voices in that process. But, but that barrier was absolutely still there, and it's difficult to remove unless you make the entire process anonymous, which becomes difficult at a certain point. But there are, maybe I could have done better with that. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Bringing students into these policy debates is both exciting but also, I mean, and those voices are necessary to hear, but also you're asking a lot of those students who choose to get involved. And also, I mean, as Marina said earlier, in the student groups and the volunteer organizations and the little committees that I put together in the PIPS program, there's a strong bias towards women getting involved in those programs. We have, even at the student level, even at the grad student level, men, of course there are exceptions, but men are underrepresented in all of those activities, basically in service in general, any kind of service or community building activities. Men are underrepresented presumably by their own choice. And that only gets worse, I think, as you get to higher ranks. We expect less of male academics. We assume that women are going to want to get involved and help people and give back, but we don't expect that from the people that have the most. Maybe that is something I've thought about that a lot. I've struggled with it, and maybe there's a policy, some sort of policy remedy for that at the graduate student level. I don't know how to I don't like to pressure people to do service at the student level because they shouldn't be doing too much. But I wish I can't find the right middle ground for a way of expressing my expectations to the men graduate students that I wish they would take a little bit of the burden from their women colleagues.
I think it's all about you speak up when you need there is something that you can do to improve for yourself and people like you, right? And I think that is where the likelihood for men to get involved, and for white men especially, is because they don't have any problem. They have very little problems around, right? And that is a cruel reality. And that's why would they invest time into other people's problem? It sounds cruel how I say it, but that is the situation. And I have to say, like, for so many things, I think a little bit of some mandatory or some like forced participation, it wouldn't hurt. And as an example, I have like these Gordon conferences that are highly focused scientific conferences on different topics. They do have this wonderful thing called a power hour, where they discuss, they do have it also during lunch break or after lunch or during, I don't know, leisure time, which I brought up in several conferences, especially in the last one, as the only part of the conference that is taking away from the free time, which I don't think that's correct. And I was told that the person who led that conversation made a note to the organizers, and hopefully people will speak up about this and change that. However, what I wanted to say in this case was that even in that case, only people that wanted to change, and there were men participants there as well, for sure. And again, like you, Scott, and people like you around us as well, they are people that want to make the change. However, I think this kind of conversation should be told in front of other people. I think there should be a way to, again, like forcing people to attend seminars is horrible, but there should be something like that at some point. I think so. That's my own.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a clever little conundrum that has kind of I don't want to say it's designed, but we're in a situation now where people who have faced the most barriers are expected to do the most to take those barriers down. And it should, I mean, it's obvious that it should be the opposite. The fewer barriers that you have faced, the less prejudice that you have faced, the more bandwidth you have, you should be disproportionately expected to use that bandwidth, use that influence, and use the success that has come to you partly unfairly to remediate that for the next generation. That just seems obvious, but that is definitely not the culture in academia, or maybe anywhere. But the logic is impeccable. It's obvious that if you're, let's say you're a faculty member in a department and you're a man, you're not the primary caregiver for the kids in your family, then it makes sense to take that basically chunk of free time that society has handed you, and you could put that into service for your department, right? Or for the students in your department, right? Or devote yourself to strategies for faculty diversification, or all these things that are so time consuming and they don't really advance anybody's career. It doesn't help anybody individually to work on these things. You're all doing it out of the kindness of your heart. And you pay a price for it. You know, if you spend time organizing the Women in Science group, that's time you could spend getting more high impact publications, right? And you know, it's not going to get you a job.
Absolutely. It is, yeah, very interesting to hear it like out loud. That's the reality. The one thing that I really wanted to ask, and that is again a very delicate subject that I'm thinking about constantly, is now that hopefully a lot of institutions will increase diversity and among the candidates and among the person chosen. How do we fight people that say, oh, you were chosen there because that spot was created for you? I don't even know how to, but I think it makes sense what I mean. Like how, as a woman, it is very difficult to think about the fact that, oh, you were chosen as a faculty because they had to hire a woman faculty. And that conversation will exist no matter what in the coming generations. And how do we fight this mentality? And also on the other hand, how do we ensure that the qualified people continue to get hired at the expense of the will of leadership to create diversity, and not to sacrifice on quality?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation I've had in a lot of different places. So I guess, I mean, I'd like to address the last part first, which is this quality versus diversity debate. And I just think, I don't know how much it's going to help or how fast it's going to help, but I just think we need to inject into this conversation every time it comes up that there is no such thing as a compromise between quality and diversity. That makes no sense. It's just absolutely illogical. If you know that you have been systemically excluding everybody but this one minority group, white cishet men, right, for generations, then it stands to reason that potential and talent is overrepresented in the rest of the talent pool because we haven't been hiring those people. So the more we can diversify, and inclusivize, if that's a word, our hiring and processes and promotion and retention and admissions, the more we are tapping into those untapped talent pools, which are overabundant in talent by definition. It must be true that they are overabundant in talent because we haven't been recruiting those people. So the idea that we need to temper our diversity efforts, because what if we miss out on a white man who was actually qualified for the job? That's just a meaningless, it's just a meaningless argument, considering how many non-white men we have passed over generation after generation after generation, and we're doing it right now. What passes for logic in these conversations never fails to astonish me. Because people act with the most serious, reasonable tone of voice will talk about, well, yes, diversity is good. We all like diversity, but you know, we have to make sure that merit is a factor in the what? We've been ignoring merit for generations, or only applying it to this tiny group of people that we considered acceptable. So I just think we have such a massive opportunity to tap into merit that we were ignoring before. You'd be a fool to miss that opportunity. And any school or program or department that fails to take advantage of that is absolutely going to get left behind. So
And the
that is a
question is-
long answer to the one sentence you said
Right.
at the very end.
No, I think like the question is, how do we make the applications like the first round of application? And that's something that how can we eliminate the bias into the application, so that when the first round of applicants are passed to the next level, there will be less bias. I think that will be a healthy. And some fields, the mathematics, I heard the mathematics departments at several institutions, I don't know, they seem to have figured algorithms better. But I was told there is very unbiased process based on several. Yeah, I can direct everyone to resources for that. But again, I'm not an expert, so I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think I like your focus on that, you know, how can we fix this one part of this very important process? Because that's where things happen. You know, policies can be changed at that one step. I think I started out in all this being a big believer in using the literature and using data, and I still believe that using data can be really helpful in specific cases. But I think my experience has been from the GRE debate onward, that logic and data and facts actually are a really small part of the process, and they're really not that important. This whole debate that we went through about the GRE here at Michigan, I don't think the numbers really changed anybody's mind. Very, very few people, very, very few people. People see what they want to see. And in fact, there's a study that came out a couple of years ago on this. So if you present to STEM faculty a study that demonstrates a gender bias in like hiring practices, which there are a million papers that prove that exists. If you show those papers, so those biases apply to men and women basically equally in most of these studies. So like you show somebody a CV with either a male sounding name or a female sounding name and ask them, would they hire this person, and how much would they pay them, right? Male academics and female academics are equally biased against women in at least some of these studies. But when you show those results to men and women, you know, who weren't participating in them, the men tend to find a way to negate the validity of the study. They'll go, well, I don't like the way you did your statistics, or maybe your sample, you know, they'll find something. And this happened with the GRE all the time. Every single one of those studies is fatally flawed if you don't like the GRE. They can't suggest any improvements, but they don't like the studies, right? Or what we should do is we should really do a good study starting right now and tracking everybody for the next 30 years. And then 30 years from now, we can talk about whether we should make any changes, right? We know what that means. So as STEM people, the logic that we apply in our own work, it just goes out the window when we try to deal with these kinds of social or justice issues. It doesn't apply. And I'm very disappointed by that, but that's just, I was naive. So, you know, what does change people's mind? I think there has been a change here about even very quickly with the GRE. We went from kind of 50-50 split, more or less, to everybody kind of like being okay with it. And in fact, seeing that it's an advantage in recruiting, right? sometimes you just have to do it and let people complain about it. And then 2 years later, they'll take credit for it if it works, and you have to be happy with that. But it's emotional arguments work. Personal anecdotes work, all that stuff that we're not supposed to be using when making policy decisions. That's what gets people to change their minds.
All right, so why don't we have someone else ask a question if they have any? Let's give space for people to have the opportunity to talk with Scott. He's very friendly. He doesn't bite. In the
I love to answer
2
questions,
hours
as you can already
that we've
tell.
had him. He hasn't bitten anyone.
I was thinking actually about, Maruna, something you said about getting men and getting people from privileged, on privileged axes involved in these things. And I mean, getting men involved in a women in STEM group presents challenges of its own. And maybe that's not the purpose of, it's important to have spaces that are not entirely inclusive, right?
Absolutely.
But for other purposes, you might want to have a gender in STEM conversation that is that everybody feels they have equal access to,
Yes, absolutely. We were. I'm also part of this New York City-wide anti-discrimination committee that we put together. Us at the CUNY Postdoctoral Association with Cornell and NYU Women in STEM, and so basically we put together this kind of movement where we basically talk about inclusion, and that is it. We are most of us women, and it's like you said before, it's impossible not to think as a woman in science, but we do. We thought about this nomenclature, and actually, thank you for pointing that out. Like how you call a group, it just may attract. Actually, just fun story. We had actually was a women in science group, but we invited everyone. It was a get together in Central Park a month ago or something like that. It was brilliant, but we opened it to everyone, and so there were so many people, so many men that got there and asked, "Oh, why am I here?" And my answer was like, because you chose to come. Like you thought it's a cool thing and it's a cool, pleasant thing to hang out with us. And now that you realize the Women in Science gathering, you're no longer happy. So that actually, and all of them were kind of, I hope we convinced them to participate at our future events, because they had no argument to that. So they said, like, yes, it's true. I came here to hang out. So yes, I'm happy I came. So yeah, hopefully that will continue.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
But thank you very much for all your answers. And it is a fantastic conversation. Really hope. The best thing about doing these recording sessions is that a lot of people will follow up and will hopefully check the recording out. So,
well, I'm very grateful for the invitation and the chance to talk about these things that are so important. And I just appreciate you letting a man come in here and talk. It happened again, but it was an honor to meet all of you and get a chance to chat with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll connect soon. I'm pretty sure about that.
Great.
Yeah, and thank you for taking the time, director of PIBS, which is essentially 13 PhD programs in one, and also doing the equity work to come to a different institution to give a talk about everything that you're passionate about. It just means a lot to us.
I couldn't say no to this group, and I couldn't say no to you, Joyce. We're Twitter buddies, and now I think I can say we're real life buddies.
I'll think about that.
Okay. I'll await your answer online. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.